Coming up, some major disrespect for Tennessee, and a father sticks up for his son at LSU. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. Glad you're with us for SEC Country Live today. We'll talk to you a lot in the comment sections. Mike, you and I will talk to each other here a bit as well, as plenty of action taking place around the SEC.
Yeah, don't adjust your computer screen.
Yeah, we're close to the same color again.
In the same color. You know, this didn't happen until a couple of weeks ago. Now I feel like it's 3 times or so in 2 weeks. So we'll get that right. And obviously we got a ton of good topics to get to.
Let's dive into it right now. Item number 1 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Bet Online, a online sportsbook we've cited a couple times over the last few days, is out with their Week 1 point spreads around all of college football. It's the SEC games that get the most attention here. Let me rattle off a few of these. The Matt Luke era as a full-time coach begins as a 1.5-point favorite in Houston against Texas Tech. Auburn a 3.5-point favorite against Washington. Atlanta. The first Vegas sportsbook, by the way, is kind of going the other direction on that. We'll probably talk more about that later on in the week. But for now, let's pay attention to West Virginia as a 7-point favorite against Tennessee. Bama 28.5 over Louisville. Miami a 3-point favorite over LSU. Now, there's a lot to say about all these games. Maybe we'll talk about a number of them. But the one that jumps out at me here is West Virginia as a 7-point favorite in Charlotte against Tennessee. Now, this is obviously Will Greer's team for West Virginia. Greer is likely among the very short list of favorites for the Heisman Trophy, was injured some last year, but this West Virginia team only went 7-6 a year ago.
Yeah.
Is a 7-6 2017 team as a touchdown favorite over what we think of as the traditional powers of the SEC on a neutral site venue. Is this disrespect for Tennessee here?
I think it's disrespect, but I don't think anybody's shocked by it, right? I mean, this is a West Virginia team that can put up a ton of points. Now, their defense is suspect. You know, Big 12 defenses are going to be suspect. But what I think I see is a Tennessee defense and a secondary that is absolutely rebuilding, lost a ton of talent, lost some talent in the middle of that defensive line. I don't know that Vegas thinks that Tennessee can kind of keep tempo. And so you look at it from that angle and you think, okay, West Virginia's going to score points offensively, right? The number 1 ranked quarterback in the country right now, one of the Heisman contenders. They've got a great group of wide receivers. They've got a spread out offense. They've got some guys they think can be difference makers. Can Tennessee keep up? They've got a revamped offense. They don't have a quarterback yet. Still some question marks along the offensive line. Still some question marks at wide receiver. Can Tennessee keep up with the tempo of what that game will be? And I think 7 points is probably the right spread right now.
Rich Olenek on our Facebook comment section says Tennessee LOL. So I guess the question this leads me to is, what does Tennessee do to avoid the LOL here? It's just playing close against West Virginia. Yeah. Does that build some momentum for the rest of the season here? I mean, it's a perception problem that Jeremy Pruitt deals with here, because you and I both think this is a pretty weak roster. And yet at the same time, if you're Tennessee, you get that big power T on the side of your helmet. You can't go out there and just get rolled every single Saturday. And I'm not quite so sure that West Virginia is going to be good enough where at the end of the season, if you get drilled by the Mountaineers, you really sort of give yourself a free pass for that. This is probably a team with a really good quarterback, but not a team that's sort of like flying through its schedule probably. If Tennessee loses this thing by a couple touchdowns, that's kind of ugly.
It's definitely ugly, but I kind of tend to look at this from Jeremy Pruitt's perspective, and I think this is an opportunity. I really do, and I don't say that to kind of blow smoke at Tennessee fans, because this is a 7-6 football team from a year ago in West Virginia. Now, I think what you have to do if you're Tennessee, and I think that's what Jeremy Pruitt is trying to do, turn this into a big boy football game. Deflate the air out of the ball. Make this a possession game. Go on one of these 8-minute drives to start the game off. Run your pro style of offense. Use your big offensive lineman to grind it down this Big 12 defense, right? Win the time of possession battle. I know that's what Jeremy Pruitt's always talked about. He's talked about pro style and then taking your shots. Win the time of possession battle. And I think if you come out and do that, you have a great chance of upsetting West Virginia, and you're going to look really good in Week 1.
Well, on Facebook, Josh Griffin agrees with you. He says Vegas is going to take all the Tennessee doubters' money. And I guess there's a gap here in terms of what's possible and what's likely in my mind. Is it possible that Tennessee could beat a team like West Virginia? As I said before, I don't think even with Will Greer, this is some sort of dominant team that Tennessee would have no chance to win. And yet, I do think Tennessee's got some real problems. So playing it close, keeping it within the 7, as at least according to the Bet Online point spread, that's about all I can really see done here. You've got a lot more confidence for Tennessee in terms of winning this game than I do, but it is eye-opening that a a team that's won a national championship in the BCS era, a team that's, seemingly a fixture near the top of college football, a touchdown favorite, or I should say a touchdown underdog to a pretty mediocre team.
Yeah, I think it's tough, and I think it's a tough pill to swallow, but I think this is kind of a reality check for Tennessee fans. Maybe, I don't think Tennessee fans are shocked by the line, right? I don't think you look at it and go, boy, I never thought in a million years. But I do think this is an opportunity to prove it. Now, if I had to bet on who's going to win the game, I'm probably picking West Virginia. But 7 points still, to me, is a little bit of a ton, because I think the way that Jeremy Pruitt is trying to go about setting up this offense and the defense, I think if he's able to do it by week 1, I think this game really does play in Tennessee's hands.
On YouTube, Sherrard Richards says Tennessee's going to be last in the East. What if the Vols are last in the East?
Yeah.
I mean, what does that do for what Pruitt's trying to sell here? He's got great relationships with 2019 recruits. Are they going to give him a free pass if they're not going to the field this season? Because obviously Pruitt's selling early playing time, and that works even if you lose. It actually works better when you lose. You can say, here's how bad we need you. That's a tried and true recruiting tactic. What if they go winless in the SEC East? What if they finish last in the division here? What does that do for the panache of Pruitt here to start his career?
I think it takes a little bit of the wind out of his sails. I mean, it has to, because what you did, Butch Jones at times looked so overmatched last year. And I think you have to at least build towards something. You're going to get Vanderbilt at the end of the season. You're going to get Kentucky near the end of the season. You're going to get some teams. Your schedule's not backloaded, right? I mean, a lot of these tougher teams you're going to face are going to be early in the season. So it's not backloaded. If you really do have a developmental coach in Jeremy Pruitt, then I think you would definitely expect him to get better as you go. So going 0-8 in the SEC again, I'm not saying that's going to put him on the hot seat immediately, but I don't think Tennessee fans would be happy about that at all.
Item number 2 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. We talked yesterday about it becoming official that the former Ohio State quarterback Joe Burrow is coming to LSU. I think the assumption here on this set is that Burrow's coming to take the starting job, although I will point out I would have said the same thing about Malik Zaire last year at Florida. I turned out to be wrong about that. Stranger things have happened than one of the current LSU quarterbacks beating out Burrow, but for now, I think that Joe Burrow is likely to be the starting quarterback for LSU. Does that mean that one of the quarterbacks currently on the roster, Nate McMillan's an NBA player, Justin McMillan, Lowell Narcisse, Myles Brennan, that one of the 3 of those guys might look to transfer? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of Myles Brennan, who at one point in time may have been viewed as the favorite to get the starting job, it sounds like his family doesn't think he's planning on going anywhere, because Brennan's dad spoke to a newspaper about this, about the Burrow addition to the LSU roster. Brennan's dad says, I try not to read social media, but with these developments and the quarterback coming in, some people are losing their minds. I want people to know that emotionally it has not affected Myles at all. He's going to compete. Feels very comfortable with where his position is right now. Here's what I think. I think Joe Burrow has 3 years and 15 pounds on Myles. That's it. He goes on to say, wow, I don't think he has a huge upper hand. I think he's in a very, very good position to compete for the starting job. He means his own son here. I really do. That's just my opinion. If I thought the opposite, if they were bringing in Tom Brady or something, I'd say, hey, Myles, look. But I don't see him in that position. That's Myles Brennan's father, Owen Brennan, via the Sun Herald there, covering LSU football. Is this another example of a dad speaking up on behalf of his son and it not exactly being the most helpful words here? Because I can't imagine that Brennan's dad here makes the situation at LSU better. I'm not sure it makes it worse, but it certainly doesn't help.
Yeah, I don't know that it helps at all, and I think it puts Myles in a little bit of a tough position, because listen, you got to go sit in the meeting room with this guy. Yeah. You got to watch film, right? He's going to be looking at Myles Brennan at some point, going, hey, what's your read on this? That route combination right there. What are you doing there with this receiving core? So it does put him in a little bit of a bad spot. But I got to tell you, I actually like his words on this. I think we're in such a time of, well, my son can't start here, so he's going to go somewhere else. Myles Brennan's dad coming and saying, listen, my kid's going to fight for the starting job. I actually kind of like his tune on that.
Yeah, but you got to understand that the Brennan, and I know you know this, but the Brennan family, with a connection to Dickie Brennan's restaurant there in New Orleans, this is a deep Louisiana family here. It's not like Brennan just going to pack it up and go play at Mississippi State or somewhere like that. The Brennans are Louisianans through and through, so that may have something to do with it. I can't help but notice, though, one of the things he points out is, a little older, okay, that's one thing, but also just a little bit heavier, but only a little bit heavier, which obviously speaks to what the knock was on Brennan that we've heard, is that he was just too thin. 175 pounds at one point in time, may have worked his way up to about 190. I'd give anything to be 190 pounds. But
metabolism's different at that age.
It is, but it's kind of funny that Brennan's dad brings that up. That's obviously a knock on Brennan that the Brennan family is somewhat self-conscious on.
Yeah, no, and I think that, anybody who's looked at what Myles Brennan has been for LSU so far and looks at what the other quarterbacks in that quarterback room have been so far, his stature is a little bit kind of more slight than some of the other quarterbacks you're seeing. You see these dual threat guys, the guys that can pull it down and run, kind of be big bruisers. That's not what Myles Brennan is all. He's definitely a pocket passer, but it just goes back to what I was saying. I don't mind him sticking up for his son. Now, yes, he has made it more difficult in some circumstances, for Myles to head into practice, but I think that we're in such a day and age, like I said, where it's, boy, my kid can't start here. My kid can't start.
Yeah.
He is putting his foot down and saying, listen, we're going to battle for it.
That's a well-said statement. Esteban Esteves on Facebook says Brennan came in last season, got all the attention this year. He thought he was a shoo-in. He needs to check himself and show out. So that's Esteban Esteves, an LSU fan, with some pretty, bold assessment there of the Myles Brennan situation. I'm not sure that Esteban's wrong about that. I think that Brennan probably thought he was the heir apparent there at quarterback, and at the beginning of the spring it seemed obvious that's the direction we were heading in, but the performance on the field during practice kind of didn't really work out that way. We saw it with our own eyes during the LSU spring game, and Brennan was nothing to write home about.
Yeah, I think that if you're Myles Brennan's dad, don't you need to keep your kind of finger on the pulse of this? Because I think you're going to build your son up to an extent, and probably to an extent that you shouldn't go. You're going to build your son up. I think that's how all dads react. But there is a point to where you look at this and say, okay, what really is your future here? Do we need to look somewhere else? And I think that keeping a close eye on it is definitely going to be a big thing. I don't think you should let Ed Orgeron take you for a ride here. But boy, it's really. I think you have to be cautious about how you proceed.
You're bringing up a really good point, though, and I don't know that you necessarily meant to, but it jumps in my head here. I've got a son. Maybe one day you'll have a son. The odds are your son's got a better chance playing college football than mine does. But let's just say for a moment we both had sons that are playing college football. In a situation like the one that Myles Brennan's in, I'm going to look at Brennan's dad and say, you know what, don't go to the media on this. Let your sons play, do the talking for him. But if it was my own son in the same situation, would I have the self-control to keep from going to the media? Because I wouldn't know how to.
Right.
I'd know how to get that reporter on the phone. I'd know how to craft the message that I wanted to craft here. I think it's the wrong thing to do, but it's sort of easier said than done when it's not you in the position to sort of stick up for your son here on this.
Yeah, and I think that there needs to be an open line of communication. I think that what Joe Burrows had at Ohio State with Urban Meyer, he kind of said, listen, let me know where I stand. I think Ed Orgeron needs to have the same kind of rapport with the quarterbacks that are in the quarterback room now. Let us know where we stand so we can make the best decision on our future.
Judah Alexander in our YouTube comment section says Myles Brennan's too small for the SEC. Is it cut and dry for you? Is he too thin to play this position?
I don't think he's too thin to play the position. Now, do I think the LSU coaches would like him to bulk up? Absolutely. This is a tough league. You cannot get through the league without kind of having that 210-pound frame. But I don't think it's too far gone where you say he can't get there. I think that he's got the frame that he can definitely add some more bulk.
Quick final question on this point. The fact that Brennan seems confident enough to want to stay, at least according to his dad's quotes here, does that put the writing on the wall for Lowell Narcisse and Justin McMillan, two quarterbacks that seem to fit more of the Les Miles Cam Cameron style of offense than what we've been told is the transition under Steve Ensminger, one that throws the ball a lot, maybe even more than 50% of the time, one that looks to get the wide receivers like Terrace Marshall and Jamar Chase and these guys involved. Is this a Brennan looking at the situation saying that he and Burrow somewhat do the same things? Now, Burrow, I think, is more mobile than what Brennan is, but is this a writing on the wall here for McMillan and Narcisse that they are, from a style of play standpoint, the odd men out?
Yeah, I think they have to make that decision for themselves. And I think that if you have somebody else kind of pointing to them or you're reading into Myles Brennan's words, then you're probably going to make the wrong decision. I think you have to look at yourself, really look at what your repetitions were in spring practices and make the best decision. Look at where your other opportunities might be and make the best decision for yourself. I said it yesterday's show. I don't think that there is room for four quarterbacks to be in this battle. You kind of echoed that same sentiment. You can't have four quarterbacks in a battle.
You can't evaluate four quarterbacks.
Be honest with yourself. If you're one of the other guys in the room, be honest with yourself moving forward about where you kind of stand in the hierarchy and try to make sure you make the best decision.
Item number 3 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Dan Wolken from USA Today has an interesting report about a proposed new rule change for the SEC. This will be deliberated during the SEC spring meetings, which maybe next week?
Next week, I think, yeah.
Why are we not going to these, by the way?
Yeah,
Destin, Florida for that?
Destin, boy, it's beautiful down there.
We need to try to figure out a way to do that at some point in time. But for now, we'll be sitting in the studio talking about them, I guess. And one of the things we'll be talking about is this proposed rule change reported on by Dan Wolken here that the Southeastern Conference is going to vote on a proposal, spring meetings, that would lift all conference restrictions on athletes who want to transfer from one league member to another if their original school receives a postseason ban, according to a copy of the proposal obtained by USA Today Sports. Dan Wolken reports that the two schools that are sort of sponsoring this proposal are Texas A&M and Florida. I can't help but think, what an act of sort of selfless behavior on the part of the Florida Gators to say, we've looked at the situation and here's what we think is best for the SEC, independent of anything else that may be going on.
Right.
We just think this would be a good rule for the SEC. Just so happens that would benefit Van Jefferson, their wide receiver, to get him eligible right away, seeing as he just transferred from Ole Miss, a program very much dealing with the same kind of things that is described here by this SEC proposal. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I think it's a good move, and you know where I come from. I always kind of side on the players on this one. I mean, I think that what you have when you're a player going to a university is you have a contract, right? You have a contract, and it's the university and your duty to uphold your side of the contract. Not everybody at Ole Miss was involved in some kind of scandal. Not everybody at Ole Miss was involved in some kind of cheating. Not everybody in Ole Miss was getting some kind of kickback. And so I think Ole Miss didn't uphold their end of that bargain, their end of that contract. So let freedom ring, I guess, on the side of Van Jefferson and allow him to land wherever he wants to. I mean, I don't think Florida's on Ole Miss's schedule this year. And I think that allowing Van Jefferson or any other player that's up against a situation like this to land wherever they want to in the SEC just puts more pressure on schools like Ole Miss to make sure they're following
I've
rules.
been very clear on this in the past. I think that transfer rules ought to be very liberal. I think you've got to be able to go pretty much anywhere you want to, even Jefferson to Florida. That sort of hurts me because my favorite team is a big rival of Florida, but even Jefferson at Florida, I think just morality speaking, you got to be eligible to play. But does it blunt the argument a bit that Florida's the one proposing this rule change when it so obviously benefits them?
Yeah. No, I think it's funny too because it's like, hey, Texas A&M, come on and hop on with us on this thing. We need somebody else.
And I apologize for not knowing. Texas A&M doesn't really have any kind of like.
I don't think so. I mean, not within the SEC.
Yeah, this is just sort of those things that we needed to be more than just us
somebody to hop on with.
Yeah.
We'll co-sponsor this thing.
And if you wonder why this is such a big deal, as Zach Appleverde recently explained on a recent episode of Chomp Chat, the Gator podcast there from SEC Country, Jefferson, along with maybe running back Jordan Scarlett, if Jefferson's eligible, he's one of the potential breakout stars for this Florida offense. Here is Zach on that subject.
When you look at Florida and try to find someone to point to and say, oh, this is a star player, you're also going to look at last year's results to kind of give you that backing. And the fact that Scarlett didn't play, I think, out of sight, out of mind, right, Jeff? I mean, he doesn't come to mind when you think about Florida right now, unless you've been in Gainesville and you've seen what he's looked like since he returned. And when you go watch that guy on the practice field, if you've been in Gainesville and watched, that's a guy that should be about getting ready to play in the NFL right now. I mean, that's how good Jordan Scarlett is. That's how good he would have been last season had he played. He is, without a doubt, a star player on Florida's football team. And another guy that fits that category who's shown it in spring and is going to show it this fall, and he's shown it before in the SEC, is Van Jefferson, who, like Scarlett, was also not playing for Florida last season. So I think that once he gets added to the mix, which I think everybody expects now because of the Shea Patterson news, you're adding not only another star player, but another star player on the offensive side of the ball.
Yes, so I mean, that's why this is a big deal for Florida, because of the potential star power that Jefferson brings to the table. But just because it benefits Florida doesn't mean they're wrong to ask for it. In this case, it also benefits the player, and I am, even if it's a Florida player, I am going to side with the player here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's we can sit here and talk about it being Florida that's coming up with this rule, but I think this is a rule that should have already been in place. Obviously before Florida got to it, it was going to take somebody that benefited from it in order for this rule to be put into place or voted on down in Sandestin. So I don't have a problem with it. I know it benefits Florida, and I know that Van Jefferson's down there waiting on his appeals approval. I think Van Jefferson, much like Shea Patterson, stood a good chance of still being eligible anyway. But this is something that is kind of overdue in my book.
Cliff Nelson says the other name that Zach Appleverde mentions there, Jordan Scarlett, the running back, is going to do well in the Mullen offense if they can get a quarterback to speed up to make the right reads in the offense. And that's true for Scarlett. It's also true for Jefferson here as well. It's great to get him eligible, and the hope is that the wide receiver makes the quarterback better. But doesn't it typically work the other way here, that it takes the quarterback to make the wide receiver? I mean, and we asked the same question about Antonio Callaway a year ago. Ultimately, that ends up being more about an off-field issue. But can a wide receiver like Jefferson, can he propel a Florida quarterback to some level of stardom, at least competency, by his own star power? I mean, Can that be possible for Van Jefferson?
I think it definitely can. When you look at somebody the size and stature of Van Jefferson, now I can't look at like a smallish wide receiver and think, boy, he's going to be better when he goes down and plays with this quarterback. I just think that or he's going to make the quarterback better. I think a guy like Van Jefferson, though, with the range, if you have a problem with accuracy out of the quarterback position, which is something that Florida might be up against this fall, a guy with that amount of range is nothing but a good thing. Throwing the out routes, throwing the first down balls, the comeback routes, the things like that. Van Jefferson can go out and get him. He's a big target, so I think he'll help Florida quarterbacks in a couple of ways.
Let me play devil's advocate on one point for one moment. I'm just going to give you a chance to respond to this. This will be the second year in a row that Florida has used the spring meetings to get an SEC rule changed so they can get a player eligible for the upcoming season. Last year, there was something about the Malik Zaire transfer that had to be sort of approved.
Yeah, what was that?
The honest truth is I don't quite remember. But they had to get a rule change for Malik Zaire a year ago. They're getting potentially the rule change for Van Jefferson right now. In both these cases, I think I was in favor of the rule being changed and the SEC player getting a chance to be eligible here. But are we worried about the SEC rule book being nothing more than a suggestion, something that can be altered at any point in time that one of the league schools thinks it benefits by kind of going against what the pre-stated rules were?
Yeah, I think that you have to be careful with that because I think in terms of being SEC fans, this is one of those things that what goes around comes around, right? Listen, Nick Saban's tried to change rules more times than anybody can count. I'm sure at some point in the future that Kirby Smart will have a rule that he doesn't like or does like or wants something to get implemented. So I think you have to look at it fairly, and I think you have to treat each rule individually and look at it and say, do I agree with this or do I not agree with this? It doesn't really matter what school it's coming from.
And I think we can all agree, or you may not, but I'll certainly say this, that it's easy to see the SEC granting this favor for Florida at the expense of Ole Miss. This would never happen the other way around. Ole Miss going to the spring meetings and say, hey, we want a rule change so we can take a player from Florida. That's never happening because Florida's just got more political power in the league than Ole Miss does.
It's possibly true. And I think that it's like I said, though, what goes around comes around, and I think you have to make the decision on an individual basis because now the likelihood is if Florida ever does go into one of those situations, Ole Miss will be able to benefit as well.
Very quickly here before we move on, Esteban Estevez says, let's talk about the real topic, Florida losing the USF for 3 straight years. Did you say that Florida scheduled a home, away, and home 2-for-1 deal with South Florida?
Yeah.
I was actually a little bit surprised to see this. I feel like if you're going to play an out-of-conference game in your state, you might as well – I don't know. There's a lot to lose for Florida against South Florida.
A ton to lose. Listen, I don't know if anybody has followed South Florida football. One of my best friends from high school went to South Florida, played defensive end down there. He actually got a win against Auburn in college before I did. And I was playing Auburn every year. South Florida goes up and beats Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium. A couple of years later, they head over to Florida State in Tallahassee, and they knock off Florida State. I think they might have beaten Miami too a few years ago. So you got to be careful if you're Florida. Now, I think Dan Mullen's building the right direction. They should be athletically superior, but it is definitely a toss-up.
All right, item number 4 here in our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of transfers, a little bit of a minor controversy here at Alabama, where Brandon Kennedy, a one-time Crimson Tide offensive lineman, has made it official the way that young men seem to do these days on social media that he is indeed planning on leaving the Alabama Crimson Tide. He says, thank you for everything. You see the message there with the RTR there at the end and a picture of him with his Alabama uniform and his position of center. He wants to go play somewhere else. He's a graduate transfer. He wants to go to Alabama. He wants to go to Tennessee maybe, or maybe Auburn.
Right.
Ironically, Alabama's 2 biggest rivals, and as Matt Zenitz from AL.com has reported, Alabama wants no part of this whatsoever. Matt Zenitz writes for AL.com, Alabama denied Brandon Kennedy's initial appeal to transfer to another SEC school. Kennedy, who decided to leave the Crimson Tide program in early May, hoping to join either Auburn or Tennessee as a graduate transfer, but is still blocked from even having contact with those 2 schools, as well as any other SEC schools and any future Alabama opponents. This is a graduate transfer here, which there has been sort of a line of distinction drawn on in the last couple of years. Is Alabama in the right, or is Alabama in the wrong?
Well, I know what you guys think I'm going to say, right? This is the Alabama guy, coming in, going to be pro Nick Saban. Nick Saban does everything right. I actually hate this. I hate this for this guy. Now, it is tough. Let me kick this back at you for a second and just give you the scenario. Justin Fields makes a little waves this year. After next season, Jake Fromm's like, you know what, Justin Fields is a starter. I'm going to head down to Florida. I've graduated. I'm going to head down to Florida and be the starting quarterback and cure all the woes that Florida's had at the quarterback position because I'm a graduate transfer and I want to be able to go where I want to go.
Right.
Are you okay with a guy like Jake Fromm landing down at Florida in Gainesville?
I mean, listen, it would obviously be incredibly painful, not just because I like Fromm, but because he's a guy that could probably help Florida. But the right thing to do is let guys transfer where they want to go. That's just the right thing to do. And in the future, that's what all these rules are heading towards. This idea that a coach like Saban can play God over a kid like Brandon Kennedy and prevent him from going to the school he wants to go to as a college graduate, that stuff's just coming to an end. I mean, that kind of unlimited power for coaches is just not going to last much longer. Would I want to see Fromm wearing blue and orange for the Florida Gators as a grad transfer quarterback? I would not. But it is the right thing to do to sort of let him have the freedom to do that. And there's actually a penalty here if you don't. We talked the other day about negative recruiting against Nick Saban and his age. This is the real thing you're going to negative recruit on.
Yeah.
That if you go to play at Alabama and it doesn't work out for you, even though they probably made all kinds of promises to you like all these programs do at the start of your career, Nick Saban's going to try to hold you hostage forever. You better believe if I was Kirby Smart, if I was Gus Malzahn, if I was Ed Orgeron, that's the message I'd be sending to recruits over and over again. Look at Brandon Kennedy. He's put Brandon Kennedy in jail, essentially, not letting him go play where he wants to, fighting him tooth and nail. Is that the kind of coach you want to play for? That's the kind of negative recruiting against Nick Saban I would do.
And I have to agree with you. Listen, there's few things that I put above, the Bama in me, right? I'm a Bama guy.
Yeah.
But I'm a players guy first. I'm an offensive line guy. I'm a college football players guy before I'm an actual Bama guy. So I have to agree with you. And I think what's the toughest part for me, and I understand the Auburn, Tennessee thing. Boy, you hate to see him land at Auburn, Tennessee. I think he should be able to go wherever he wants to if he's graduated school. If you're already a graduate and you have that degree in hand, then your mission in Alabama has been accomplished. You should be able to go wherever you want to go. I think that it pains me even more to look at it and say you can't go anywhere that's on the schedule and you can't go anywhere within the SEC. If he wants to go to South Carolina, who cares? Who cares if the guy goes to South Carolina? So as much as it pains me to say, I'm with you on this. I think this is a bad look in a lot of different ways.
Here's the other practical point about this, and your Jake Fromm scenario is a different example, but that's more hypothetical. In the real world, the truth is, if he's good enough to hurt you, he'd also be good enough to help you. In other words, if he was good enough to go to Tennessee and Auburn and cause you a problem on the field, then the odds are you'd be playing him anyway.
That's
you know
true.
What I'm saying?
Yeah, and I understand that. And then listen, Tennessee needs offensive linemen. I mean, it's no secret that Jeremy Pruitt would love to have Brandon Kennedy wind up at Tennessee. He might plug in right away as one of the starters up there. That's just the nature of the beast. So I agree with you. If Nick Saban, if he can't get on the field at Alabama, then you don't be that worried about what he's going to do at Knoxville.
Let me go to YouTube and get a couple comments on this. Tyler Mann says, you don't block guys who are committed to your school from talking to your rivals, so don't do it now. That'd be true for an undergraduate or even an incoming college student. Tyler's right about that. Teresa Lowry says, still may try and make him redshirt. That's tough on a graduate student. Obviously, what he's going through for Teresa, a Tennessee fan, I'm sure she'd love to see him there in a Tennessee uniform. A.J. Collard said he shouldn't want to go play for the teams he's supposed to have hated for 4 years. But I mean, I understand where AJ's coming on that, but the fact of the matter is, you're going to be loyal to Alabama to a fault, even to the point of exhausting all your college eligibility? No. I mean, that's unrealistic to say that no one's going to get out there on the football field and be a player. I mean, your loyalty to yourself is greater than your loyalty to your school, and I would think that's true for every single person that's playing in the SEC.
Not only that, but look at the style of offense that Tennessee is wanting to play. I think that lends to interior offensive linemen. If you're wanting to go play in a pro style of offense, that's where you're going to hit. I think there's an amount of comfortability with Jeremy Pruitt, Chris Winkie, also on the coaching staff up there.
Is Tennessee more the favorite than Auburn would be?
I'm not sure at this point because he hasn't been able to contact either one of them. But I would think as hard up as Tennessee is for offensive linemen, they would have to be the one to go to.
On YouTube, Tyler Mann says something else. He says Saban tried to do this with a guy going to Georgia in Kirby Smart's first year. Eventually, he let him go. This is BS at its finest. The player that Tyler's talking about here is Maurice Smith, who was just a nickelback at Alabama, became Georgia's defensive MVP in 2016. This was a big get for Georgia, and my understanding was that this really created maybe a bit of a rift between the outgoing defensive coordinator Kirby Smart and his former employer Alabama. And from a Georgia fan's perspective, this was an example of Smart sticking up for Georgia against Alabama and saying, hey, I don't work for you anymore, Nick Saban. I work for Georgia now. A lot of Georgia fans really like this. Is this Jeremy Pruitt now trying to do the same thing, going down the same road of Kirby Smart of, hey, I'm going to, try to buck Nick Saban right from the get-go here? Is there an element of symbolism involved in this potential recruit?
Look, this hits home, and I wasn't even going to go down this road, but this hits home for Jeremy Pruitt. Jeremy Pruitt was in this situation in college. I don't think a lot of people understand that. Jeremy Pruitt, although he was an Alabama guy, he transferred from Middle Tennessee State down to Alabama. And his coach at Middle Tennessee State, who he still keeps in touch with, allowed him to leave and enroll directly at Alabama and get on the field the next year. So this is something that's near and dear to Jeremy Pruitt's heart. We talk about, coaches getting rule changes and things like that. I would not be shocked to see Jeremy Pruitt at front and center of this.
Scott Franklin says Saban gets what Saban wants, not that I agree with it. But in the case of the Maurice Smith deal, a very similar situation to this, he lost. I mean,
yeah, he did.
If I had to guess,
he lost in the court of public opinion, too.
He lost in the public opinion. He just flat out lost, and that Smith ended up at Georgia because Smith's mom kind of got involved here and, sort of weighed the public opinion in her favor. My guess is he loses on this, too. If Kennedy wants to go to Tennessee or Auburn, my guess is that's where he ends up.
No, I agree. And it was a monumental day last year when we talked about Maurice Smith on SEC Country Live, because it was probably the first time I completely disagreed with something Nick Saban was doing. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. We've had very few people. We have had a couple. We've had very few people in the comment section that actually think he needs to stay at Alabama.
A couple final points on this. Sharon Strickland on Facebook says, if you've graduated, you should be free to go wherever you want, though the needs of students were supposed to be paramount. That's well said by Sharon. John Nicholson also says it's a bad look for Alabama. Let the guy go like A&M did with Coda Martin. Take the high road here. That's also well said by John Nicholson. Agreed. Speaking of A&M, let's do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Athlon Sports, a publication that I really like, recently came out with its list of toughest schedules in the SEC. If we show you the list here, you see one thing in common for all of these. A&M up at the very top, LSU at number 2, Auburn at number 3, Tennessee at number 4. They all have that big early season non-conference game. Texas A&M plays Clemson. LSU plays Miami. Auburn plays Washington, which may be the Pac-12 favorite. Tennessee plays West Virginia. We talked about that game earlier. These are all the sort of common denominator for all these toughest SEC schedules. But when you look at the number 1 schedule on that list, Texas A&M, there's something else that jumps out at you. Not only does Texas A&M have to play Clemson, which poor Jimbo Fisher, I mean, the thought is that's why he goes to Texas A&M, to get away from playing Clemson every year. Right out of the gate, he's got to play them. But look at the rest of this. And to me, this is almost like a misprint. Look at all the road games that A&M plays against top-flight SEC West teams, playing at Alabama and Auburn. SEC East crossover against South Carolina, also on the road. That's probably a ranked opponent. Somehow going to Mississippi State as well. It almost seems like when you look at this schedule, it's almost like the SEC messed up and gave them too many road games. You know? Like when you look at all those @ signs, it almost seems like there are too many than you should have for a regular schedule.
No, I agree with you. And it's crazy how it sets up. I mean, they've got 3 home conference games. They got Arkansas and Arlington, Texas. That Clemson game looms pretty big when you talk about sitting there in week 2, September 8th. I think that's an absolutely huge game. I think this schedule definitely is something that's not going to do any service to Jimbo Fisher. But I got to tell you, I kind of tend to disagree with the fact that this is the hardest schedule in the SEC.
Really?
Because to me, and you got LSU sitting there in second place, to me, when I look at LSU's opponents, not so much where the home games are, where the away games are, LSU's crossover games are Florida and Georgia coming from the East. Down in Baton Rouge for the Georgia game, I understand, but they're going to Florida, they're going to Auburn. They've also got Miami to start the year off with. I'm not trying to down what A&M's schedule is. I think it's a very tough one. But the Arlington game against Arkansas, I think A&M should win handily. I think there's a couple of other games on that schedule they're definitely going to win handily. Their crossover games are South Carolina and Kentucky. I've got A&M favored in both of those. I just think it's one of those things where you look at what LSU's schedule is, and I think it matches right up against what A&M's got going on.
It's ironic that LSU, the team you talk about, is actually at the end of the season for Texas A&M. The problem is, by the time you get, I mean, these are your conference home games, and they don't come around for you until November 10th against Ole Miss, which is a sort of a funny bouncing ball as it is, and then LSU at the very end of the season. I mean, both these teams are going to need that game, and since we're talking about A&M right now, I'll sort of talk about this from the perspective of the Aggies. I mean, A&M needs that home game against LSU. If they want to sort of, exceed their Vegas total, if they want to sort of make good on Jimbo Fisher's first year, I think you got to beat LSU at home, who, as you said, will have also played a really tough schedule. But poor Texas A&M doesn't get those like big conference home games until the season's essentially done late November. Who knows what they still have in the tank by then?
I agree, and I think that's one of those measuring stick games. We talk about Dan Mullen at Florida. You talk about at some point you got to beat Florida State. At some point, you need to start beating Tennessee, obviously, right off the top if you're Dan Mullen. We talk about Will Muschamp at South Carolina. What are their measuring stick games? Well, you got to be competitive against Georgia. You got to be competitive against Clemson. I agree with you. If you really want to be Jimbo Fisher in year one to open some eyes to what you're doing, I think you've got to beat LSU, and I think you've got to make a statement in that game, and I think that's going to be a really tough game for them at the end of the year. I will say this, too, because we've had a couple of people in the comment section, and they've kind of opened my eyes to this, too. Auburn's schedule might be tougher than both of them.
Really?
Might be tougher than both of them when you look at the fact that Auburn has Washington, a top 5 team to start the year, neutral site, in Tuscaloosa, in Athens.
Georgia, yeah. That's a tough schedule.
That's a
really
tough schedule, man. That is a hard pill to swallow if you're them.
I might would have considered, and I'm sure the Athlon probably had some sort of mathematical formula, but I might have considered ranking Auburn as the toughest schedule because they got to win one of those rivalry games in Malzahn's contract year.
Yeah.
A year after getting the big extension, you can't go 0 for 2 there, but playing both those games on the road is really tough. To bring it back to A&M here for one real quick final point, though, Jimbo Fisher goes on Texas radio not too long ago talking about his 2 quarterbacks and the way they finish up the spring. Obviously, these are guys. Kellen Mond's a guy that I have talked about a lot. Nick Starkel's a guy that you've talked about a lot. And Jimbo kind of talked about the different ways in which they finish up the spring. He says on Texas radio that both Kellen and Nick have different spring games. Nick played well, had one critical mistake, didn't panic, made drives late in the game. Kellen Mond didn't panic when his team didn't start strong. Showed patience, took advantage of his opportunities. That's Fisher from Texas radio there. And what that quote makes me think of is that, and I've said this a million times, I really do think that I'm right about this, is the Texas A&M quarterback competition is unique compared to some of the others in the SEC in that the silver medalist in this battle, if you had to start that guy, you wouldn't feel that bad about it.
Right.
Starkel probably wins this thing, but you could start Kellen Mond and be fine. If Kellen Mond beats out Nick Starkel's a really good backup there at that point in time. Does having the quarterback, and I think between the two of these, A&M's probably going to have a pretty good one. Does having the quarterback make it easier to navigate the really tough schedule? Auburn's got that with Jarrett Stidham. LSU, it remains to be seen about Joe Burrow. How much better do you feel about playing Clemson, going to Auburn, going to Alabama, knowing that you're going to have a better quarterback than a lot of these other teams that you're going to have to face?
No, I think there's a couple of huge components about this. And I think you bring up some really good points too, but I think there's a couple of components to look at here that make this a different quarterback battle than we've seen at most of these other schools. Look, you can go look at Jalen Hurts and Tua. Tua's never started a game, right? I mean, you can go Justin Fields and Jake Fromm. Justin Fields has never started a game. He's never been in uniform for a game at Georgia. Same thing's kind of going on with Myles Brennan and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's been at Ohio State. Myles Brennan's had some kind of mop-up snaps. Both guys at Texas A&M have had meaningful snaps on the football field.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a true quarterback battle where I don't know if there's a bad decision. Both of these guys have been, tough. Kellen Mond played an incredible game against Alabama last year. Almost led a comeback against Alabama. Nick Starkel's been in crunch time against some teams too. So I think if you're Jimbo Fisher, I don't think there's a bad decision to be made here.
In the comment section, Beaumont Airy says that he thinks that Kellen Mond may actually be a better fit for the Jimbo Fisher offense, but can he make the throws? We'll certainly find that out. Here's something I'm about to say, and it's going to aggravate some people to death. I'm not intentionally trolling when I say this, but there's been a lot of off-season hype in terms of Keaton Thompson, however you say it. He's been talked about as, this may be the best backup quarterback in the SEC. That's Nick Fitzgerald's backup in Mississippi State. I'm not buying that for a minute. Jordan Teamo, the starting quarterback at Ole Miss, has been talked up. You get the tandem there with he and Matt Corral. I'll take Jimbo Fisher working with Starkel and Mond over both quarterbacks at Mississippi State, working with Joe Moorhead, and over both quarterbacks at Ole Miss, working with Matt Luke. If you want to start comparing these quarterback situations in the SEC West, I'll take the 2 A&M quarterbacks, given the coach that's working with them, more so than the tandem at Mississippi State or the tandem at Ole Miss.
Boy, those are big words. I mean, it's hard to really dive into what you're saying right there and disagree with you because I think Jimbo Fisher is. But I think when I look at the situation and I look at Jordan Ta'amu at Ole Miss, look at his wide receiver corps. I mean,
A.J. Brown may be the best in the whole league.
We talked about Athlon Sports today. Athlon Sports named them the #1 wide receiver corps. Even losing Van Jefferson, the #1 wide receiver corps in the country when you look at what Ole Miss has got. So I understand what you're saying. I think it's tough to look past Jordan Ta'amu and the numbers he put up and the limited amount of time he was on the field. But I don't think there's a loser in that scenario either. They're both very good.
Jamie Blanton says, and we'll change the subject after Jamie's comment, that A&M is not ready for a tough schedule. I'll say it until I'm proven otherwise. Jimbo is a fraud and a hell of a salesman, just like John Gruden, Jimbo the bimbo. It is amazing. That's the hashtag he uses. That's not me embellishing. It is amazing how much hatred there already exists for Jimbo Fisher in the SEC, which where I'm going to come from in this. That means that he must be doing something right. If you've already got sort of rival fans saying, "Oh, I don't like this guy. He's a used car salesman," Jimbo's doing something right here. I think this is an example of that point.
I think that there's a couple of different reasons for that. First of all, he comes from Florida State. They played Florida every year.
I mean, he looks like, this is a dated reference, but he looks like J.R. Ewing getting off that plane right there.
I have no idea who that is.
Yeah, that's a Dallas reference. You ever seen the old Dallas CBS show?
Never seen
Yeah, I knew that's a dated reference when I said it. But I mean, he just looks like a Texas guy. I mean, look at this guy sitting high in the saddle on that horse right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason he's so hated, though, is because he's been in SEC country. And he did make the statement a year ago at this time, wasn't it, that the ACC was the better conference,
Right,
the best I mean, we got the Heisman Trophy winner, we got the national champs, we got this and that. I think that's the reason he's so hated. Gators fans already have a hate for the guy. I mean, Alabama fans had to start the year off with him last year, got a hate for the guy. He's just hard to like to a lot of people other than Texas A&M fans. I think it's going to be a tough pill for a lot to swallow, and I think that at some point he's going to be very good down there.
Let us do item number 6 here in our SEC Country Line first and 10 list. And there's been a lot of talk about quarterbacks at LSU, given the fact that Joe Burrow just transfers in there. And some of it's been knocks from the national media. There was an Adam Rittenberg piece at ESPN.com. There was the famous Greg McElroy line from a few days ago about how he hopes that LSU gets a quarterback there in his lifetime. And so Alex Hickey, who's a good reporter covering the Tigers for SEC Country, took a deep dive into this subject to try to determine, is the LSU quarterback situation as bad as what some in the national media are saying it is? And what Hickey found out, at least based on his research, maybe not quite what it's been portrayed to be. Alex Hickey says, though the numbers show LSU's been below average in passing production, there is one school that stands out below the rest when it comes to poor quarterback play in the SEC since 2012. And it's not a bottom dweller such as Vanderbilt or Kentucky. It's Florida. Do you agree that in recent years, the Florida quarterback situation has been worse than LSU?
I absolutely agree with that. And I don't think it's a stretch to get Florida fans to agree with that, because here's the bottom line, and here's what you really have to look at, and here's the statement that came to my mind. LSU has had a quarterback problem for the last 10 years. Mettenberger was good. Danny Etling was above average. They've had quarterback issues. Florida has had offensive issues. LSU has had good offensive players.
That's a good point. That's a
LSU's
really good
had
point.
Good wide receivers, good offensive linemen, great elite, like generational running backs. Florida hasn't had any of that. Florida's had offensive line problems. They've had wide receiver problems. They've had good ones. They've had good running backs. But they have had a quarterback problem for a really long time, and for that reason, an offensive problem.
I hope y'all are noticing this. This is a guy that's already done one whole show today. He did Roll Tide Daily this afternoon on the Alabama SEC Country video channels, and he's coming back making a point like that LSU has had quarterback issues, but not necessarily offensive issues, whereas for Florida, it's an entire sort of blanket throw of the entire thing. Their entire offense has been dire, but it really shows up in the quarterback stats maybe more than anything else. According to Alex Hickey, since 2012, Florida's average finish in passing yards per game, 10.5 in the league. That's 14th in the league in terms of the average finish since 2012. Also, quarterback rating since 2012. They average a per-year finish of 11.5. Once again, that puts them 14th in the SEC over the course of that span there. So that's him speaking to what's been the issue for the Florida quarterback situation. And there's really no point in relitigating the past. As you said, Florida fans probably even agree with that. But I think it does speak to the extra pressure that noted quarterback coach Dan Mullen has on him, working with a group of quarterbacks of kind of mixed pedigrees. Emory Jones, sort of an uber recruit for the class of 2018. Kyle Trask, sort of an unknown commodity. Felipe Franks, I think it's safe to say, a bit of an underachiever, former U.S. Army All-American who hasn't really played that way. It's pressure on Mullen to find something out of one of these three guys, is it not?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. And we've talked about Mullen, and we've talked about bringing him along. And that's why I haven't been that down on Emory Jones, because maybe this is planned for Dan Mullen. Maybe this is part of his plan. Hey, listen, I know how to speak to these guys. I'm a quarterback guru for a reason. I know when to play him and when not to play him. I think the test, and I don't know if we're going to get to the test for Dan Mullen here in year one, but let me see Kyle Trask do some things.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's going to open a lot of people's eyes to just how good of a coach Dan Mullen is if Kyle Trask comes out and is an above-average quarterback. If this offense is an above-average offense, I think you can point straight to Kyle Trask, or whoever the starting quarterback may be at that point, but I think it's going to be Kyle Trask. I think you can point directly to that and say, boy, if Dan Mullen really gets his guy in this situation and a dual-threat guy, Florida's going to be scary for years to come.
Our MJD over here on YouTube says, that Florida quarterback situation is why I'm dumbfounded, is why you're so high on Florida for this upcoming season. I mean, you do have to factor that in, right?
I definitely do, yeah. No, I think that's a very fair question. I think that I look at Florida, who, first of all, is a defensive football team, has been a defensive football team for the last 10 years. They've got great DBs. They've got pass rushers. They've got decent linebackers, although I wouldn't say great linebackers. I think Jordan Scarlett's an above-average running back. I think the offensive line they have coming back if given the right circumstances under Nick Savage, can be an incredible offensive line. So I think the quarterback, although it is an issue, I think that Dan Mullen can find ways around that this year down in Florida.
Rick Keene, who, if I'm not mistaken, has sort of migrated from the Facebook comment section over to the YouTube comment section.
Rick bounces back and forth.
He's a Florida fan, says, I completely agree with that sentiment expressed by Alex Hickey. Florida ran off the only capable quarterback that we've had since 2009. That's why Dan needs a big dog at the quarterback position. So you're right, that's a pretty good Florida fan there saying that what Alex Hickey's saying is not wrong. Will Grier was in the program. He got ran off, and Florida's really Will Muschamp era, Jim McElwain era, start of the Dan Mullen era, sort of looking for that quarterback.
You know, I think it's unfair, and I understand what Florida fans are saying. Boy, we haven't had a quarterback. I think it's unfair to really label some of those guys that have come through the Florida program as really bust, because I think there's been a couple of them that have gone on to other places and been good quarterbacks. I just think
Brissett, jump out.
I think the offense was in such upheaval, just needed such an overhaul that there was never a chance for a lot of those guys to be good. You know what I'm saying? Like, there just was never a chance in a lot of those circumstances for a guy like Jeff Driscoll to be a good quarterback down Florida. He wasn't surrounded with what he needed and the tools he needed.
Morgan Recton on YouTube says, our quarterback and offensive problems of recent years, why I have a drinking problem, LOL.
Yeah, I don't.
I think a lot of Florida fans right there with you.
Yeah, I think a lot of SEC fans have been down that road before when you want to talk about that.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Let me go over your Facebook here for a moment. Rostamon Blair says, horrible coaching with Brissett, Driscoll, Grier. All have had success once they left. Brent Peace, Muschamp, McElwain, Nussmeier, look at the talent that's drafted. It's not been coached up. I think that Rostamon's probably at least, somewhat right in this, in that, in Will Grier's case, it was probably a misevaluation. I don't think they realized how good he had a chance to turn out to be. And in the case of Brissett and others, probably just not developed the way, I know you talk a lot about development. This is probably an example of a position that just hasn't been developed effectively.
I'll make the argument that it was in, and Florida fans aren't going to want to hear this, I'll make the argument that it was in Will Grier's best interest to go somewhere else like West Virginia. I don't think Will Grier, you can look at it as Florida fans and live in hindsight and say, boy, we let the #1 quarterback in the country go in Will Grier. I don't think Will Grier is at that spot if he's still down in Florida, and maybe still be playing for McElwain.
Greg Steele in the Facebook comment section says that Will Grier wasn't run off, and I'll admit I'm not in Gainesville every day. Many of you Florida fans know that situation a lot better than I do, but I don't think that Will Grier was welcomed back with open arms to a return to the Florida program. I do think he was given the cold shoulder. If I'm wrong about that, you can correct me here, but I think that's what happened, right?
I think there was definitely a little bit of falling out.
And Florida sort of started moving in a different direction.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of falling out between the two, and I don't know, and I'm not obviously well versed enough in Florida to say whether or not he was run off, but I think there was a reason that Will Grier headed elsewhere. I don't feel like he had the backing of the Florida staff, and maybe that definitely weighed on his decision to head out of town.
Yeah. Olbrandt says that Will Grier would not be having the same level of success if he'd stayed at Florida. He'd certainly be putting up bigger numbers at West Virginia because that's a program designed to put up those big numbers. Item number 7 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. The outgoing general manager of the Baltimore Ravens, also an Alabama grad. He is maybe the greatest tight end of all time, certainly the conversation for great tight ends, Ozzie Newsome. And he was recently a guest with Ryan Fowler on his show that airs as a podcast on SEC Country. And the subject of drafting Alabama players came up. And is there a benefit for an NFL GM taking players that come out of the Alabama program? And it's probably not a surprise to you that Newsome, the Alabama grad, thinks that former Alabama players have a tendency to do pretty well in the pros. Here is Ozzie Newsome on that subject.
If you just look at the two corners that we've taken, Mullen and Anthony got schooled by Amari Cooper, who's had a successful career. They had to cover Calvin Ridley. So every day they go out to practice, they're practicing with guys that are going to be playing in the NFL, and it's probably going to be playing at a very high level. And then the way the program is set up is that if you don't perform and if you don't do the things that you have to do on and off the field in the classroom, then there's somebody right there knocking on your door ready to take your position. So you got to play at a high level all the time.
This seems relatively easy for me to understand that. And look, obviously, Ozzie Newsome's not an objective analyst when it comes to stuff like this. He's an Alabama guy. But coming from a program where you're pushed hard during practice, I do think it makes your chances of success at the next level all the much better because, we quote the iron sharpens iron thing all the time from the book of Proverbs, but in the football sense, it really is true.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a couple of different directions to look within what he's saying because I think he's speaking as a front office guy in the NFL? What do you want people to have when you get to the NFL? You want them to be self-motivators. You want them to understand really what they have to do to get to the next level. You want them to feel like somebody is always behind them. And I think that's what the best players do, and I think that's what he feels like is being groomed at Alabama. I think that's the easy direction to go if you're Ozzie Newsome. I don't think he's an insider what's going on in Alabama. And actually, when he said somebody's knocking at your door if you're not getting the right grades, somebody's going to be behind him, I thought he literally was about to say somebody's knocking at your door, like somebody's going, get your butt to class. And both of those things are true, though, at Alabama.
But on the idea of accountability, that is something that Newsome went on to describe just how important that accountability is at Alabama, because you're sort of judged and evaluated not just on the very high Alabama standard, but in comparison to other guys who are trying to achieve the same thing you're trying to achieve. Here's more from Newsome on that point.
They become very accountable when they have those situations like that. And the other aspect of it, when we get a chance to interview the players from Alabama, a lot of people can have a BS or a master's degree. When you talk to the players from Alabama, it's like they got a PhD in their position or how the scheme works. It's unbelievable the way they understand the game. They take that understanding and apply it. Those are the things that you get.
So you're an example of this, or at least someone we can ask about this. Did you know more about offensive line play? Now, it's also worth pointing out that you only had Saban for half your career. The machine wasn't fully in place. Right. You started it, but now after a full decade there's a lot more of that in place. But do you feel like from a cerebral standpoint, as an offensive lineman, when you got to the NFL, you've been better prepared for what the league was going to present you than some of the guys you either battled against, competed with during practice? I mean, how much did Alabama prepare you for the NFL?
I don't think there's a doubt about it. And actually, I think I'm better suited to talk on this because I didn't play for all 4 or 5 years for Nick Saban. I played 2 years under Mike Shula. And I kind of saw the opposite, in a lot of ways of what he's talking about right there. Let me give you an example of what Ozzie Newsome's talking about, because he is a general manager and he is retiring. He sits in on these meetings. When you get to the combine, they don't walk in and say, okay, you're a left guard. What does a left guard do on this play? Draw it up on the board.
Yeah.
They'll bring you into that room and then sit you down and just say, I know you know what the left guard does. What is a wide receiver doing on this play? What's the fullback doing on this play?
Is that right?
Split the tight end out and tell me what the tight end's doing on this play, because that's what makes football such a cerebral game.
Yeah.
When you're on the line of scrimmage and you have a defensive end outside of the tackle and that corner walks down the line of scrimmage, you can't guess who's going to get him. The quarterback will get blindsided. That's what Ozzie Newsome's talking about. That's what goes into development when you talk about that, teaching schemes to these offenses.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think, with the topic we talked about earlier, it's sort of the best and worst of Alabama. If you're one of the guys that sort of gets caught up in the churn there a bit, then you can sort of feel like you're held prisoner by a bunch of guys ahead of in the depth chart, kind of like Brandon Kennedy feels like. But if you're one of the guys that sort of makes it through that navigation, you really have earned a spot that a guy like Ozzie Newsome as a Ravens GM is going to be paying more close attention to.
I think it's, and he's obviously talking a lot about defensive players. He has loved defensive players in his times in Baltimore because you know where your help is. Listen, that guy's out in coverage behind me. I know that my weak side linebacker's out in coverage on the tight end, so I know where to turn this running back to. Running back comes in me, I know not to let him get to the sideline. I know to turn him back into that safety that's rolling down in the box, and that's why he says PhD in football.
Item number 8 on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list, Brock Heward, who we actually had some audio from the other day here on SEC Country Live, is a Pacific Northwest guy, radio host, also an analyst, former Washington quarterback, and he was on the morning show there, WJOX in Birmingham. A lot of different subjects come up during the interview. WJOX is a good sports radio station talking a lot of college football on a daily basis, but in particular, Heward was asked, hey, compare the two brand new coaches in the state of Florida, Dan Mullen at Florida, Willie Taggart at Florida State. Which of these two guys is more set up for early success? And for Florida fans, maybe you don't love Brock Heward's answer.
I'm going to say Willie Taggart, and that's a little bit more probably a lean on the ACC versus what Dan's got in the SEC. And, he wanted to go back there. He knows it. He knows the conference very well. Obviously, he gets out of the SEC West and into the East there, where now, unfortunately, Kirby is some others. But I would think that much like Jimbo had a pretty good run at Florida State and Bobby before him. And, Willie had some opportunities there, recruiting in that state, the tradition, the history, the opportunity there to, I think, have some more sustained success or maybe even a quicker ramp up to success in Tallahassee than Dan does with the challenges in that conference.
So it's not a slide on Mullen necessarily, but it's a sort of a comparison of, for Sunshine State programs, Florida State easier in the ACC than Mullen here in the SEC. Therefore, maybe more early success for Willie Taggart, maybe more success in general for Willie Taggart. Is that a fair assessment? And if you're a Florida fan, how are you supposed to feel about this?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair because I look at, first of all, we've talked about quarterbacks today a couple of times for Florida. Look at the quarterback situation for Willie Taggart going on at Florida State. I mean, he's got DeAndre Francois, he's got Blackman, he's got a couple other things that really.
Is Francois going to start? I guess it's something I maybe should know. I honestly don't have any idea.
It's a quarterback battle, I guess. I think that he's back healthy and starting for the fighting job with Blackman. So,
but Blackman wasn't even that good, though, was he?
He got to be above average. I think he took a lot of the fall for a lot of downfall under Jimbo Fisher last year.
The offensive line was also terrible.
It kind of goes along. That's what I'm saying. I think it kind of goes along with what we were talking about Texas A&M, right? They've got two quarterbacks that have had snaps that are above average quarterbacks that can do good things. Willie Taggart's walking into a situation like that. We talk about Dan Mullen developing his quarterback down there in Florida. Willie Taggart's already got a step in the right direction. He has two quarterbacks on his roster that have played an entire season as a starter.
So I'm looking at the Florida State schedule here, and I'll be honest with you, I have no idea if this is a hard schedule or an easy schedule. I don't have any idea. It's Virginia Tech at home. They do have some tough road games. They're at Louisville. I have no idea how good Louisville is. At Miami, I know that's a tough game. They do get Clemson at home. They're at Notre Dame here as well. Here's all I'm going to tell you. However many games Florida State wins, Florida needs to win one more.
Yeah.
If Florida State wins 9, then Florida better win 10. If Florida State wins 6, then Florida can get by with winning 7. Mullen's got to be better than Willie Taggart in his first year. And that's really, no matter how good Taggart is, Florida's just got to be a little bit better. That's the goal here.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that, but I think that's tough. I think that it's going to be about that game that they play. And I don't know if they play in Tallahassee or Gainesville. You guys can answer that for me.
I got it right here. It's in Tallahassee.
So I don't think it's fair to say he's got to win more than Florida State because I think Florida's, they're going to be playing Georgia. LSU's coming to Gainesville. They got a couple of.
Yeah, but Florida State's going to play Clemson and Miami.
To Mississippi State, I think it's going to be a hard game for him. I just think that saying more wins than him, I think that's kind of overlooking the point. I think that he needs to definitely be competitive and probably beat Willie Taggart in year one if you really want to open some eyes.
Yeah, but he better do more than just pull that upset. It better not be an upset when it gets there.
That's kind of my point, yeah.
It better not be 4-win in Florida, salvaging a win there at the end of the season because, listen, there are a lot of in-state players paying close attention to what's going on here. You think about Derek Rambo Hunter from down in South Florida, the defensive end. We talk about, Noah Kane and Trey Sanders, especially Trey Sanders, the two running backs from IMG. These in-state players are going to be paying attention to these schools. Miami's got its little thing going right now. Taggart's a good recruiter. I don't think you want to let Florida State get a head start on you as sort of the in vogue program in Sunshine State. Mullen's got to start winning with some of these elite in-state Florida kids, and it would seem that winning games on the field is a great way to do that.
No, I agree. I think there's a lot that goes into it. It just, I don't know. I tend not to want to give. I would want to give, Florida more credit for beating a South Carolina football team than Florida State, who they play Syracuse. You know what I'm saying? I don't know really how the schedules match up, but I would have to think just from the outside looking in, the Florida
State.
State's
Don't sleep on Dino Babers? Is that his name? Dino Babers on the road? They beat Clemson at home last year.
I just tend to think that I don't want to give Florida State that much credit for running the gauntlet that is the ACC schedule.
Here's all I'm saying. In very stark terms, you have to define what success is for the season. You can't compare yourself to Georgia because Georgia may be too good. It's probably not worth comparing yourself to Tennessee because Tennessee's not good at all. So who do you compare yourself to if you're Florida? The in-state program with a brand new coach, that feels like a pretty good comparison, all things being equal.
I think it is. I'm more tempted to say, let's measure you against Miami, I guess, and I think that's because they're
definitely not as good as Miami.
Well, no, not last year they weren't, but that's not to say that's.
Yeah, but Miami's a point. Miami's gonna be a favorite in every game this season.
Oh no, they're not.
I'm not saying you'll win every game. They're gonna be a favorite in every game.
I think you've got too much Mark Richt in you from back in the day. I don't know.
I'm very happy with where Georgia is right now. That's also probably a different topic for another show, but I feel like it's a reasonable comparison. Compare yourself to Florida State and be as good as them. Be a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think we just have two different points of how you get there. I think it needs to be measured on the field at the end of the year. I don't think you can say, well, Florida State had more wins. I think Florida probably has a more difficult schedule.
By the way, Morgan Recton says Trey Sanders is going to be a Gator. That's in our YouTube comment section, so they're kind of weighing in on that.
Trey Sanders.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Cliff Nelson also says that he thinks Florida State has the slightly easier schedule, so you just got to beat them head-to-head. I think that's a good point there by Cliff Nelson on that, too. Let's do item number 9 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Kirby Smart spoke to some media briefly last night in Columbus, Georgia, and down in the sort of the southwest corner of the state, very close to Auburn, ironically. And one of the subjects that comes up is the uncertain status of former Uber recruit DeAngelo Gibbs. a defensive back who really didn't finish the year in good standing at Georgia, also dealt with an injury. Gibbs, who missed spring practice because he wasn't enrolled in classes, is now back attending UGA classes again. A lot of people, probably me included, sort of felt like this was a foregone conclusion that Gibbs would also be back ready to play again this summer in practice, this fall in the field. And Kirby Smart said last night, slow your roll on that.
He's working and doing the things we ask, and he needs to continue to do that, and we'll make a decision when the time comes. But being enrolled in school doesn't signify that he's with our roster right now.
And if you're not following Kirby Smart enough on that, he was even more emphatic, saying no, that the media was way, way too much in terms of jumping the gun on this, way too premature. Here's more from Kirby.
That's probably a little premature on y'all's part. I think that nothing's done with DeAngelo Gibbs until he's back with us, and that verdict's still out right now.
So Gibbs is not necessarily even a starter for Georgia, and it's not a huge story to outside fans from the Georgia Bulldogs. But the point that I would bring up on this is that while Georgia's trying to be like Alabama with just as deep a roster, it's probably not quite there yet. And Georgia needs all of its, as many as possible anyway, of its former elite Uber recruits to really make a contribution. And this is a head-to-head battle that Georgia won over Alabama to get Gibbs to the class of 2017. And if for some reason it doesn't work out for him, either spiritually, physically, or emotionally, he's not a part of this team in 2018, it's a pretty big loss for Georgia, because Georgia needs former very high 4 stars, or in some classifications 5 stars. If Georgia wants to have the same roster Alabama has, it needs a guy like Gibbs to contribute.
But I love the way you just put that, spiritually, mentally, physically. No matter what it is, it's holding you back. Figure it out and get back on the football field. And I think that these are very calculated words from Kirby Smart, right? I think that he understands that I don't want to go out on a limb and say, boy, he's on the fast track to coming back, because I think that it's such a it's one of those situations that go either way for him. I think Kirby Smart, one slip up, one thing not doing the right things you're supposed to do, and all of a sudden Kirby Smart could be in the bad and looking bad. So I think he's right to kind of take his time with that and look at it and say, listen, by no means does this say he's back on the football team. We've got to take our time with this, and when the time comes, then we will say he's back ready to contribute.
Last season, Trent Thompson, who was a former also #1 recruit in the country for the class of 2015, missed spring practice. But in May of 2017, I went back and looked at some of the quotes. Kirby Smart was actually speaking very hopefully of Thompson, treating him like he was still a member of the team. He's talking differently about Gibbs than he talked about Thompson a year ago when they were almost in the same situation. That's probably at least something to pay attention to there. A lighthearted way to close things out here with our first and 10 out of number 10. How about the former Mississippi State star, Rafael Palmeiro? You may know more about this than I do. Back trying to play professional baseball again. He's 53 years old. He was one of the really big sluggers in the 90s in an era when I was all about Major League Baseball. Got kind of tangled up in the steroid deal for a while. Who didn't? But now trying to give it a go. And, well, last night he went yard. Take a look at this cool piece of video of the 53-year-old Palmeiro giving one a ride here. You think you'll be able to do that when you're 53?
Lord, no. I couldn't do that at age 30. I mean, it's... So I guess the story here is they signed his son to a AA contract and him as well. And why you say he got tangled up in the steroid era? He lied straight to Congress.
Yeah, he lied.
Like he was like, I don't got nothing.
That's a good point. He put his finger right in the face of the congressman and said, or figuratively speaking, and said that he didn't do steroids. But obviously he did.
So I know that this is impressive nonetheless. But I know the running joke's going to be, boy, anybody can do that on HGH. The guy's got a sweet swing when he's 30. At 53, he's probably on HGH at that point.
So what do you want to do at 53, or really even at this age? I mean, for me, it'd be more like I'd rather dunk a basketball and hit the ball over the fence.
No, not me. Not me.
You don't want to dunk a basketball?
No, listen.
You know how gratifying that'd be?
Dunking's never been vertical. I'm vertically challenged.
That's the whole point. I mean, I'm giving you a free pass to choose what you want to do.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like at that point, I'm not. It's one of those things where, boy, I wish I could do it like I used to. Nah, at this point, I'm just cool with just having a sweet swing and hitting over the fence. That's cool.
I mean, at my age,
I wouldn't be able to walk the next day if I dunked a basketball.
At my age, I just settle for being able to get a pitching wedge over the water. Same. That's about the only athletic goal that I have these days. Nonetheless, though, here on SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show with our champion of life. It's sort of a lighthearted, listen, we get serious with the SEC, but it's always fun to kind of go the other direction here before the show wraps up. And this is actually one of my favorite ones we've done in a while. Maybe it's because I have young kids, but take a look at these kids. I have no idea why they're in these costumes. But if you're a fan of the Transformers, watch these kids. These are real kids, real costumes.
Oh, my God.
and they train. Watch Optimus Prime here. Take a look at this. Is that not amazing? It's a real kid. Here's Bumblebee.
Oh my God!
That's his name,
am
Bumblebee.
so impressed with
Watch
this
this.
kid's
Watch
parents
this.
right now. I hope I'm that parent.
Now, this kid's going to suffocate in that box, but nonetheless, that is an awesome. Now, watch. They're about to transform back.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. I'm dumbfounded. I have not seen this video until now. I'm dumbfounded. That is unbelievable.
Isn't that not great?
That is
one of our best ones in a while.
I hope I'm that cool of a parent that I can get my kids in that kind of costume.
Mike Johnson's daddy said, in terms of my nights, I'd settle for uninterrupted night's sleep. Yeah, at this age, that's about right, MJD. I appreciate that. Hey, thank you all, Old Brant, weighing in on that. Willie McGuire on YouTube. We appreciate that. Facebook commenters, thanks to you all as well. You've made it a fun day for us. We're back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. In between now and then, listen to the podcast. If you want to go back and relive the show, or you want to the part of the broadcast you missed, we'll be up there. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating and review. That's a huge help. Also, share the show with your friends on the video channels, Facebook, YouTube, the other Twitter. Let them know we're talking with the SEC every afternoon. It helps us grow, helps us continue to bring SEC Country Live to you. We appreciate that. We'll see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of SEC Country Live.